This is the story about how an indie filmmaker used an iPhone, an anamorphic lens, and FiLMiC Pro to get a major break into the industry. This is about filmmakers who made a feature-length movie against the odds, with a tiny crew and a fraction of most movie budgets. And this is the story about an iPhone movie that shocked the film industry, and how the filmmakers finally got the recognition they deserved. They had 3 iPhone 5S devices, 3 anamorphic adapters, and before smartphone gimbals even existed, they had a couple of SMOOTHEE stabilizers by Tiffin. The director had been making micro-budget movies for years, but just couldn't get that break. And he was at the point where he'd had enough of making films for nothing, having to ask cast and crew to work for free, and begging people for equipment. And this is the story about how we might never have heard of this major indie director if it wasn't for the iPhone. A director whose next film was then nominated for an Academy Award, as well as 17 other major awards. Without the iPhone, this director might just be another struggling indie filmmaker on the fringes of the industry. But he took the risk on the iPhone and won, creating a stunning movie that was probably the first to put smartphone filmmaking truly on the map. After this movie, smartphone filmmaking could no longer be dismissed as a purely amateur pursuit. And this is also a story about filmmakers who never gave up. Through 20 years without a major break, they kept going, learning their craft, and knocking on film industry doors. And for the love of movies and life itself, succeeded through their unrelenting passion and drive. Born in 1971, Sean Baker is an American film director, cinematographer, producer, screenwriter, and editor. In the year 2000, he released his first feature film, 4 Letter Words. Produced for $50,000, the film follows a group of young men at an all-night party, but the film would reach only a limited audience. 4 years later, he released his second feature film, Takeout, which depicts a day in the life of an illegal Chinese immigrant working as a delivery man. And the film premiered at the Slamdance Film Festival. You'll notice a pattern already emerging. The stories are both contained within a single day. Sean Baker later stated, "The reason for doing this is because on a limited budget, you can't afford a costume change for the actors. By containing the story within a time frame where the characters would wear the same clothes, he saved money." The budget for Takeout was $3,000. This and his next feature, The Prince of Broadway, was self-funded from money he received from successful puppet sitcoms made for MTV. Persistence paid off when Baker received $250,000 in funding for his 4th feature, Starlet. Released in 2012 to critical acclaim, the film was co-written by longtime collaborator Chris Burgosh. However, the film was not a commercial success, and no one wanted to fund their next movie. It looked like Baker's movie career had hit the buffers, but there was one small chance. An offer from well-known micro-budget indie producers, the DUPLASS brothers. Mark Duplass and Jay Duplass are 2 brothers who are also actors, directors, producers, and writers. The Duplass brothers found success in the early 2000s, coming out of the MUMBLECORE movement. Their breakout film was The Puffy Chair, made for $15,000. Mumblecore is a subgenre of indie film, mostly shot on very minimal budgets. The genre tends to focus on quirky, naturalistic dialogue with loose plots. It's centered around characters in their 20s and 30s, usually suffering some kind of postmodern angst. The Duplass brothers did well enough that they were able to set up their own production company, and after seeing The Prince of Broadway, they made Baker an offer. They would fund his next movie as long as it was shot on a micro-budget. And Baker initially turned them down. He'd already made 4 micro-budget features, with each one taking a huge amount of time and energy. Plus, he'd wanted to take a step forward after Starlet, and this really just seemed like a step backwards. As Chris Burgosh explained later, making movies for almost no money can become something of a trap.
The problem we were faced with is financiers will say, you just made a movie for $250,000. What do you need $1 million for? What do you need $2 million for? And it's this catch-22 because, you have to explain to them that you can't call in any more favors, from your friends. We have people working for free, and we just want to pay people properly. And then these producers, the DUPLASS brothers, Mark and Jay DUPLASS, they had an outstanding offer with us. And they said, if you guys have an idea that lends itself to another micro-budget indie, please come and talk to us. We'd love to work with you guys. But the only catch was, it would be half the budget of Starlit.
Then Baker saw a way of making this movie that would have been unthinkable a year before.
He came to me and he's like, you're going to think I'm nuts, but what if we just shoot this on the iPhone? And I'll be honest, I was like, really? He showed me the clips. And when I saw it, I could not believe it was shot on an iPhone back then.
A Vimeo channel containing various experimental iPhone video clips had left an impression on Baker. As well, he found some clips of footage using a prototype of an adapter for the iPhone, which allowed you to shoot real scope. In film industry jargon, scope is short for CINEMASCOPE. The term is still widely used by both filmmakers and projectionists and generally refers to 2.35 to 1 or 2.39 to 1, or basically the use of anamorphic lensing in general. Moondog Labs, the company making the adapter, had a Kickstarter running to launch the anamorphic lens for iPhones. Baker contacted the company and told them about his project with the DUPLASS brothers. Moondog Labs agreed to send them 3 prototypes of the adapter to try out, and these ended up being used to shoot the movie.
I found at the time that we shot a year and a half ago, there happened to be some new tools that were designed. One of them being an app called FiLMiC Pro, which was very useful. And actually, to tell you the truth, I wouldn't have made this film unless we had an app like this.
Until FiLMiC Pro came along, there was no way to easily control focus, white balance, or exposure. It also allowed Baker to shoot at 24 frames per second and boost the bitrate to increase the quality of the 1080p footage, which was the maximum that the iPhone 5S could shoot at the time. The last bit of kit employed was a thing called a SMOOTHEE, made by Tiffin. Motorized smartphone gimbals hadn't yet been invented. The SMOOTHEE worked simply by balancing the iPhone on the end of a curved counterweight. Now, they were notoriously difficult to use, swaying left and right, and if you didn't control the swaying, your footage looked like it was shot on board a boat. But the iPhone 5S had no inbuilt stabilization, and this was really the best option going at the time. Although Baker considered shooting on a DSLR, he decided not to jump on that particular bandwagon, because he really wanted his 5th micro-budget feature to stand out from the crowd. As well, there would be extra costs involved using a DSLR, and shooting on the iPhone would enable them to pay the cast and crew, rather than keep asking favors as they had to on their previous micro-budget films. Baker made some tests with the Moondog Labs anamorphic, and persuaded Technicolor to let them show the clips on one of their screens. The DUPLASS brothers were invited, along with the other investors in the film, and everyone was amazed to see the quality of the video from the iPhone 5S, even when blown up to a cinema screen size. Finally, Mark DUPLASS gave them the thumbs up, saying, "Let's do this, it's like punk rock." Now that Baker had the method, he and his co-writer Burgos needed a story. Here he explains how they found inspiration.
We met at NYU. We've been collaborating ever since. And in 2009, MTV did a series with us called War and the Ape, and it was a spin-off of a show called Greg the Bunny, and it's become sort of a cult thing in the US. And that brought us to LA in 2009. And we were living right on the corner of this place called Donut Time. And it's this infamous intersection. And it's a very sort of down and dirty area. Anytime you would pass, there was some sort of shenanigans happening on the corner. Day or night, there were prostitution and drug deals going down, and just always some sort of fight happening. And so that was very intriguing to us as a possible place to set a story.
For 8 months, Baker took to the streets with his team to get to know the area and its people. He eventually came across aspiring trans actor Maya Taylor, who plays Alexandra in the movie. Baker and Burgos listened to the stories told to them by the people who would end up playing the main characters in the movie. And one of these stories then became the basis, or the kind of inspiration, for the story of the movie, which would later be titled Tangerine. The story follows a transgender sex worker who discovers her boyfriend and pimp has been cheating on her, and the movie takes place over one 24-hour period, again following that low-budget filmmaking trick to avoid the extra complication and cost of costume changes. And it might sound a bit odd that costumes can make such a big difference to the cost, but extra costumes have to be looked after by someone who also has to keep track of when a costume change should take place, as well as the extra cost of buying the costume itself. So even just something as simple as setting the film in a one-day period can save you budget when you're making a micro-budget film. At the time, shooting a movie on an iPhone was a big risk and very much looked down on, almost to the point of ridicule. And here Chris Burgos explains how they overcame this negative aspect of shooting a movie on an iPhone.
Let's just embrace this. And instead of looking at it as like, oh, this is just going to be a film shot on an iPhone, it's like, yeah, what can we do with the iPhone that we wouldn't be able to do with a bigger rig? And then we kept it a secret because every now and then when you talk to close friends about this, they'd kind of discredit us. They would just kind of roll their eyes going like, oh, that's not a real movie. No one's going to take you seriously if you shoot this thing on an iPhone. It's going to be a glorified, YouTube video. You can't let people influence you, I would say. And so that's the number one lesson that I learned is just don't be influenced by negative, cynical minds.
Through Maya Taylor, Baker met Kiki Rodriguez, a fellow trans actor who would be cast as the volatile yet lovable Sin D. As soon as he saw them together, Baker knew he had a movie. Taylor and Rodriguez were close friends with the trans women who worked the area, and they wanted the story to be told. Before agreeing to be in the movie, Rodriguez insisted they show the harsh reality of what goes on in these characters' lives, but she also insisted that they make it funny for the women who make their living as sex workers.
And in this day and age, everybody's taking selfies, right? So it allowed them to be very comfortable. That's another benefit that we found that the iPhone gave us, is that they were able to step right in front of those iPhones and they weren't even there. There was no looking at the camera. There was no, sort of like nervousness that sometimes it takes to get over for the first time actors. And so that was a great happy accident that we couldn't have even predicted.
Principal photography began in Hollywood on Christmas Eve 2013 and finally wrapped on January the 18th the next year.
And we were moving so fast because, like I said, such a small crew. I think we just kept rolling with it.
Sean Baker co-DP'd the movie with Radium Chung, who had DP'd his previous film Starlet, but Chung couldn't be there for the start of the shoot, as he was working on the TV series The Americans. For that reason, Sean Baker had to shoot alone at the start of filming, until Chung showed up. Baker, previously a messenger cyclist in New York, took to shooting tracking shots using his bicycle, with one hand holding the iPhone on the SMOOTHEE and the other hand steering the bike. And Baker managed to achieve the film's distinctive sweeping camera shots this way. These shots simply wouldn't have been possible using more traditional cameras, even with a bigger budget. While filming with iPhones was pretty unconventional and led to a very fluid, literally mobile style of cinematography, they recorded sound in a very conventional way.
There was so much press about Tangerine being this iPhone movie. No one ever talked about the sound, and the sound is so important, and they almost made it sound like we used the iPhone's microphone. This is not the case. We had a professional sound guy named Aaron Strauss, who we've been working with for like 12 years now. This guy's a madman. Does the sound, just the traditional way, mostly booms, also wireless lavs, and, we're just slating every shot and just doing the sound the good old-fashioned way that they've been doing it for over 100 years.
Filming a micro-budget movie comes with many challenges. It usually means working with minimal lighting or just what's available. For Tangerine, Chung brought portable fill lights to use for night shots as well.
For Tangerine, we mainly practical lighting. Since our budget was so low, our crew on Tangerine, by the way, was maybe like 6 or 7 people. We all wore multiple hats. We just found places where there was available light. So in other words, if we needed a character walking on the street at night, if there was a building that had a nice fluorescent green light, we would just, let's go over there. We based a lot of the locations just on, what the lighting was like at night. But that's what gives it a cool vibe, I think, is like, you kind of almost feel it.
A lot of the film was shot during what's known as magic hour, and this is the time when the sun is setting or rising and the shadows are long. And this, combined with shooting in Los Angeles, created the kind of orange look of the film, and this kind of inspired them to even call the film Tangerine. Baker and his team had 3 iPhones. 2 phones were like the A and B cameras, and then they had one as a backup, and that was just in case anything went wrong with the 2 main phones.
We shot on the iPhone with the, the H.264 That gets transformed into a ProRes 422. I know I'm getting way technical here. We edited on Final Cut 7. The only other trick that he pulled is DaVinci Resolve for, some sprucing up of the color.
The iPhone 5S had 64 gigabytes of internal memory, which, when shooting with the maximum 1080p resolution, allowed them to go a whole 12-hour shooting day without ever running out of space.
Battery is the only thing we had to worry about. So we had a lot of MOFIs, or what those are, the external power packs. We had permits. For example, Donut Time was a central location in the film. Obviously, you have to get permission from them, and they let us shoot there. But the only provision was we couldn't close the store. Every customer that comes in and is buying donuts, those are real people. And the woman in the film who plays Mama-san is actually our producer, Su Ching So. And she's also not only the producer, she's doing costumes, she's doing continuity. Now she has to actually serve donuts to real people. And one of the major things on Tangerine was you have to get them to sign a release to be able to use them in the film. So Sean's rolling the camera, and we're in Donut Time, and you have to picture this. Real people are coming in and out. They don't even know they're being shot. We have to watch them buy the donut and walk out the store and walk into this crazy intersection. We're waiting for Sean to yell cut. He's still rolling. We have to keep our eyes on the people. And finally he yells cut. We have to run out. Everybody goes and gets the people that were on camera and explains to them, hello, you were in a film. Do you mind if we use the footage?
And sometimes people just refused to sign this release form, and then that footage just couldn't be used. So these are just the kind of challenges that you face when you're making a micro-budget movie. There was only a limited amount of money available for post-production, so Baker edited the film himself. For the look of the film, Baker decided to exaggerate the colors, creating a more saturated look. He also added a film grain to give the movie more of that film look character. But Baker wasn't working completely alone here, as they also brought in a professional colorist to work on the final look. Sundance is one of the most important film festivals in the world. For indie filmmakers, it's probably the most important of all of them. If your film gets selected for Sundance, you're far more likely to sell the picture and have a successful theatrical release. That said, nothing is guaranteed. Baker's Tangerine appeared in this section called Next, which is intended for future filmmakers. And that's kind of ironic considering we've been making movies for over 2 decades. Sean Baker says they were actually expecting to see a number of iPhone films at Sundance. They just assumed that the time was right and that everybody would be picking up their iPhones to make films now. As it turned out, Tangerine was the only film showing at Sundance that year that was shot on an iPhone. They were so anxious at getting a negative reaction about this iPhone filmmaking, they decided not to tell anyone. Instead, the film was listed as normal, without any mention that they used the iPhone. But in the end credits, Baker decided to reveal the truth with a title which said, shot on iPhone 5S. And as these final credits rolled, critics and industry types who were all watching the movie just couldn't believe their eyes. The shockwaves reached far and wide and fast. Like Chris Burgosh some months before, many in the industry simply couldn't believe the movie was shot on a phone.
It certainly looks good, doesn't it?
It looks astonishing. I mean, I thought my photos were good.
These days we're all used to the idea of professional quality video created by smartphones. But in 2015, this came as a complete shock to critics and movie industry professionals. The film had a limited theatrical release on July the 10th, 2015. Through a company called Magnolia Pictures, receiving critical acclaim for its screenplay, direction, performances, and portrayal of transgender individuals. And the film took almost $1 million in ticket sales, 10 times its $100,000 budget. And we really have to say that Tangerine truly was the film which inspired thousands of filmmakers to pick up their phone and start shooting. Sean Baker and his team had proved once and for all it was possible to make a professional level movie with an ordinary old iPhone. If you sign up to my Patreon, you can watch Chris Burgosh's full talk on how they made Tangerine. And there's also 5 episodes of our smartphone shot Amazon Prime series, Silent Eye, including a making of podcast for each episode, and all kinds of other downloads and smartphone filmmaking resources. And thanks to all the new members who joined us on Patreon recently. So I just wanted to tell you about how they made Tangerine, because when I made my feature film, before I made it, I did a lot of research into how other filmmakers had made their low budget films, and I found it really inspiring. And finding out how other people made their films and made a success of it can be really kind of energizing and get you motivated to have a go yourself. You can see from the making of Tangerine that it's not about tons of equipment. To make a feature film is actually pretty simple. Of course it's hard work, and it doesn't mean that it's easy. It just means that anybody can try. And as you can see from Sean Baker's story, they made 5 feature films before they got one which got them a break into the industry, and 20 years of work. But what I find is that when you see other people are doing it and have gone out and just done it with an iPhone or whatever camera you decide to shoot with. I shot my feature film on a camcorder that cost me £600. Essentially, the story is just to get a camera, whatever camera you can, and go out and make your films. So that's it for this video. If you found it useful, let me know by giving it a thumbs up and sharing it as much as you can. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next video.